Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Donald Trump has condemned as nonsense allegations that Russian intelligence has compromising material about him. A report, which is so far unverifiable, makes damaging allegations about Mr. Trump's business interests, claims his election campaign communicated secretly with Moscow, and also contains suggestions of unusual sexual practices by Mr. Trump. The president-elect suggested the US intelligence agencies could be responsible for leaking the allegations and tried to focus instead on his priorities in office, including dealing with so-called Islamic State, which he described as #1 tricky. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports.
Donald Trump is 9 days away from inauguration as President and America's Commander-in-Chief, but his path to the White House is now tangled in extraordinary controversy. What role might the Kremlin under President Putin have played? To help Mr. Trump, to undermine Hillary Clinton, and perhaps also to gather compromising material to use against President Trump once he's in power.
My friend and the President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
This afternoon, Donald Trump was blunt. The allegations against him are totally untrue, designed to undermine him.
Thank you very much. It's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen. And it was gotten by opponents of ours, as you know, because you reported it, and so did many of the other people. It was a group of opponents that got together, sick people, and they put that crap together.
So what could Moscow's role have been? In shadowy work both to promote Donald Trump and also gain a hold over him. Here he is visiting the Russian capital in 2013 for the Miss Universe pageant, then co-owned by Mr. Trump. The most lurid claim is that he used the same hotel suite which President Obama had stayed in for unusual acts involving sex workers, all of it allegedly recorded by Russian spy cameras and microphones.
I was in Russia years ago with the Miss Universe contest, which did very well. Moscow, the Moscow area, did very, very well. And I told many people, be careful, because you don't want to see yourself on television. Cameras all over the place. And again, not just Russia, all over. Does anyone really believe that story? I'm also very much of a germaphobe, by the way.
The source for the unproved claims is said to be a former British spy, an ex-MI6 officer who was once based in Moscow. Today, Dmitry Peskov, President Putin's spokesman, said the allegations were pulp fiction, a clear attempt to damage relations. Mr. Trump says he's in no way compromised by Vladimir Putin's preference for him as the next president.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability, because we have a horrible relationship with Russia. Russia can help us fight ISIS, which, by the way, is #1 tricky. I don't know that I'm going to get along with Vladimir Putin. I hope I do, but there's a good chance I won't. And if I don't, do you honestly believe that Hillary would be tougher on Putin than me? Does anybody in this room really believe that? Give me a break. Okay.
The press conference got most heated when CNN, one news organization which has covered the latest allegations extensively, tried to put a question.
Since you are attacking our news organization,
not you.
Can you give us a chance?
Your organization
you
is
are
terrible.
Attacking our news organization.
Your organization
Can you give
is
us a
terrible.
chance? Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude. No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir, can you...
These papers are just some of the many documents.
Mr. Trump also used the occasion to display some of the legal documents, turning his businesses over to his family. It's his response to accusations of future conflicts of interest. But the controversies surrounding Donald Trump and Russia are not going away. Those who voted for him and those who rejected him all know his presidency will be a stormy one. James Robbins, BBC News.
Well, our North America correspondent Paul Wood is in Washington for us. Paul, let's just talk about this dossier of allegations against Mrs. Trump. You've been following this story for some months. What are we to make of these allegations, and how long have they been circling?
Well, this is a series of reports. The first one was written in June, the last one in October, commissioned by an opposition research company funded by a Democratic Party donor, but actually written by a British former MI6 agent. And he spoke to members of the Russian security service, the FSB, paying them for information, but several of those FSB officers told him there was a blackmail tape. Now, I understand that the CIA believes this is credible and takes it seriously. That is not the same as them endorsing it or saying it is accurate. But I passed a message through an intermediary to the case officers dealing with this file, and the message came back that there was more than one tape, there was audio as well as video, it was on more than one date and in more than one place, not just the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow, but St. Petersburg as well. And in addition to that, it is not just the MI6 officer who is the source for this. I was told by a retired spy back in August that the head of an East European intelligence agency had told him also of the existence of a blackmail tape on the Republican presidential candidate. Now, having said all that, these are allegations, nobody has seen the tape, and Mr. Trump is literally correct when he said so far this is unsubstantiated.
Okay, Paul Wood in Washington, thank you. With me is our North America editor, John Sopel. John, it was Mr. Trump's first press conference since becoming president-elect. It was certainly an unusual one. What was your assessment of it?
Well, I think we've got used to the somewhat bizarre standards by which we accept communications from Donald Trump. And this one was way beyond anything that we've ever seen because of this swirl of allegations about his business activities and about his personal conduct that we heard Paul Wood talking about. And just worth underlining that, you know, there's a whole lot of, is this fake news or not? We're reporting this because the intelligence agencies thought it was serious enough to bring it to the attention of the president-elect and the president himself. I thought what was a remarkable scene in that news conference was the extent of his distrust, not towards the press, you'd expect that, but towards the intelligence services, the US intelligence services, the CIA and the FBI, whose job it is to keep Americans safe. And it seemed, listening to his tone, that he was more sympathetic to what Vladimir Putin was saying than what his own intelligence services were saying. That is something that's going to cause, could be a source of great tension going forward. I think the other thing that I took out of it was that Donald Trump has sought to put his business interests into a blind trust, but he will still retain ownership of those businesses, and I think ethics lawyers will want to take a long, hard look of that. And a final thought, Donald Trump has been brilliant on social media at biting. Today he was bitten.
John Sopel, thank you.
Looking serious, at times even shaken, Donald Trump used his first news conference in months today to denounce the explosive claims being made about his private life. He said the lurid allegations concerning prostitutes in Russia are fake news and put together by sick people. And he said the events could not have happened because, in Mr. Trump's own words, he is a germaphobe. The president-elect went even further, saying if US intelligence agencies were behind the leaked dossier, it would be a tremendous blot on their record. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore was there.
With explosive and unverified allegations swirling around him, just days before he becomes the 45th president, Donald Trump went on the attack from the very beginning, saying the news reports based on intelligence leaks are outrageous.
And I think it's a disgrace that information would be let out. I saw the information, I read the information outside of that meeting. It's all fake news, it's phony stuff, it didn't happen, and it was gotten by opponents of ours.
America's intelligence agencies are investigating a dossier compiled by a former British spy, alleging that Donald Trump, on a visit to Russia, engaged in personal behavior that has left him deeply compromised. It was a question I put directly to him.
Can you make clear whether during your visits to either Moscow or St. Petersburg you engaged in conduct that you now regret, and that a reasonable observer say that you are potentially vulnerable to blackmail by Russia or by its intelligence agencies?
Let me just tell you what I do. When I leave our country, I'm a very high-profile person, would you say? I am extremely careful. I'm surrounded by bodyguards. I'm surrounded by people. And I always tell them, anywhere, but I always tell them, if I'm leaving this country, be very careful, because in your hotel rooms, and no matter where you go, you're going to probably have cameras. I'm not referring just to Russia, but I would certainly put them in that category. And number one, I hope you're going to be good anyway. But in those rooms, you have cameras in the strangest places. Cameras that are so small with modern technology, you can't see them and you won't know.
The allegations are not just about Trump's personal behavior, but also about whether he and his advisors, including his former campaign chief Paul Manafort, have long been hiding a covert political relationship with the Kremlin, including changing policy positions in return for hacked information on Hillary Clinton. Trump also ramped up his attack on his own intelligence agencies, making a startling comparison with the Third Reich.
I think it was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And I say that, and that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do. I think it's a disgrace.
It leaves the transition in turmoil.
You're fired.
An incoming president with questions being raised about his very loyalties, queries that will almost certainly follow him now into the Oval Office.
A few moments ago, I spoke to Robert, who, as you saw, had a front row seat in that press conference, and I asked him how Donald Trump was weathering those allegations.
Well, this was classic Trump, using extremely provocative language throughout that press conference. He was contemptuous of those news media organizations who are pursuing the story, withering too about what will be his principal intelligence agency, the CIA. He believes the agency is leaking information against him, by implication believing they are trying to undermine him even before his presidency has begun. And as you heard in his answer to my direct question, he is saying that there is nothing in terms of his personal behavior during his visits to Moscow that makes him vulnerable to blackmail. And he went on to say that actually if Vladimir Putin becomes a friend of his, that is very good news indeed. But plenty of ammunition there for his political opponents for sure. There was a real sense of crisis about that press conference, and none of the questions being asked inside that room are going away anytime soon.
Robert Moore speaking to me just a couple of minutes ago.
9 days to the inauguration of Donald Trump, and his first news conference as president-elect became a damage limitation exercise. He angrily dismissed allegations that Russia had compromising material on him. The uncorroborated documents claimed Trump's campaign was communicating with Moscow, but rather more explosively that there were or are allegedly salacious videos filmed in a Moscow hotel room. Today, Trump hit back, calling the claims fake news, phony stuff, put together by sick people. Moscow has dubbed all the claims pulp fiction. Our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris, has this.
The President-elect of the United States.
When the President-elect took to the podium today, he faced a bona fide political crisis that might have been torn from the pages of a paperback thriller. A leaked but unsubstantiated intelligence dossier suggesting that the Kremlin holds compromising and salacious detail on the future American president, and that Russia deliberately staged an online disinformation campaign to secure his win. Not only that, there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between several of his campaign staff and the Russian leadership. Before Donald Trump spoke, he'd already tweeted to declare the story a political witch hunt and deny he's had anything to do with Russia. It was all, he declared, fake news.
It should never have been, number one, shouldn't have even entered paper, but it should never have been released. But I read what was released, and I think it's a disgrace.
A disgrace he blames on partisan intelligence operators and a crooked media.
That the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. I think it's a disgrace. And that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do.
But he hit peak outrage when a reporter from one of the news agencies to break the story, CNN, tried to ask him a question.
Sir, since you're attacking us, can you give us a question? No, Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect, since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
you are attacking our. Give us a question. You're attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorical?
You are fake news to my
The president-elect also dodged a question on whether he or his aides had any contact with Russia during the campaign. He conceded that Vladimir Putin may well have ordered the hacking of senior Democratic email accounts, which the Russian leader shouldn't have done, but praised Moscow's intervention on his own behalf today.
You know, President Putin and Russia put out a statement today that this fake news was indeed fake news. They said it totally never happened. I respected the fact that he said that. If Putin likes Donald Trump, guess what, folks? That's called an asset, not a liability.
Appearing alongside him on the podium, piles and piles of paperwork, which President-elect Trump used to illustrate his decision to sign over his business assets to his sons, although there'll be no blind trust and he'll not divest ownership in the company. Well, that was clearly the subject he wanted to address. The Russia question loomed large not only in New York, but at confirmation hearings for the nation's top diplomat on Capitol Hill.
The man who'll define the future relationship between Russia and the United States, the next Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is getting a real grilling from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Here's the problem. He's meant to allay concerns about the cosy relationship between the next president and the Kremlin, but he has his own deep ties to Moscow.
There is scope to define a different relationship that can bring down the temperature around the conflicts we have today.
Neither Donald Trump's cabinet nor Donald Trump himself have been sworn in as yet, but already there's a sense of freewheeling crisis. Exciting for Americans who wanted, indeed demanded change. Not so thrilling for those who didn't.
Well, Donald Trump was giving that news conference at the beginning of Kylie's piece, and I'm wondering how it's going down, Kylie.
Well, John, people I think are really digesting this. It was a fairly extraordinary appearance, very much a kind of freewheeling, rollicking appearance. Obviously, it was designed for him to deliver this very kind of presidential statement about how he was going to avoid a conflict of interest. That's why he had the table there with all those notes. Apparently, all the contracts he'd signed away to his sons, so there'll be no ethical dilemmas facing him in the future. But obviously, the whole Russia issue simply overtook that. You could see him getting increasingly annoyed and frustrated by questions around that. He did shift position slightly. If you have to keep going. He contradicted himself a number of times, but he did seem to at least acknowledge that Vladimir Putin may well have been behind the hacking of the DNC, the kind of John Podesta emails that we saw that troubled Hillary Clinton just before the election. And he said that Vladimir Putin probably shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, he very quickly said, but wasn't the hacking great because we learned all this very interesting information about Hillary Clinton? So it was ultimately helpful. And that is the difficulty. He's really in the jaws of a dilemma here. He doesn't want to acknowledge too much interference by Vladimir Putin or Russia, if that indeed happened, because that would, if you like, acknowledge a weakness in his own campaign and set him up for I suppose, enjoying a victory in an unfair election. Obviously, he doesn't want to do that. He's trying to look presidential. He's got all these confirmation hearings rolling on the Hill, many of them controversial. This mega-rich cabinet, Rex Tillerson, environmentalists were there protesting against the appointment of an oil boss to be the foreign secretary of the United States, to be Secretary of State. As well as that, there are questions about Rex Tillerson's own relationship with Rosneft, with Russian oil. And we've got Jeff Sessions, who is still being considered for the job of the Attorney General, who has, had to deny issues around his judgment in the past, certainly as far as race is concerned and whether or not he's a racist. He's answered some of those questions, denied them all yesterday. But Cory Booker, a senator, has been questioning him again today. So there is a lot of sound and fury around Donald Trump himself and the people he wants to appoint. And we're not even there yet. The inauguration is still a week away. So I think that people will be sifting through all of this information and trying to get a sense of how Donald Trump pulls this all together to look presidential, to assume the White House in a way that will draw him the admiration of all Americans.
Kylie Morris. Matt.
Well, as Kylie just pointed out, Donald Trump also said for the first time that Russia had been behind the hacking attacks. But since it was a throwaway line, one can't be entirely sure whether it was a genuine reversal of opinion or not. The intelligence services in the US have long accused Russia of orchestrating the hacking to swing the result in Trump's favor. As we just heard, some of the latest unsubstantiated accusations go even further against the president-elect himself. But how credible is all this? Here's our international editor, Lindsay Hilson.
The most serious allegation, unverified, is that the Kremlin coordinated with Trump's team to win the election. The most scurrilous is that in his room at the Moscow Ritz-Carlton in 2014, the very room where President and First Lady Michelle Obama had slept, Russian intelligence filmed Mr. Trump in a compromising encounter. The Russians say the allegations are pulp fiction.
The Kremlin has no compromising materials on Trump. This is absolutely fake information, a fabrication and complete nonsense. The Kremlin does not engage in gathering compromising materials.
Welcome back to Miss Universe 2013. Coming at you
It was
from
after that
Moscow.
pageant in Moscow, according to the memo, that Russian intelligence allegedly filmed Mr. Trump in his hotel with prostitutes engaged in salacious acts. Today, he denied it all.
I was in Russia years ago with the Miss Universe contest, which did very well. Moscow, the Moscow area, did very, very well. And I told many people, be careful, because you don't want to see yourself on television. Cameras all over the place. And again, not just Russia, all over. Does anyone really believe that story? I'm also very much of a germaphobe, by the way. Believe me.
The source who wrote the memo reportedly worked for MI6 before becoming a private investigator. So are the allegations of compromat, compromising people for blackmail, credible enough to investigate?
I lived in Russia for 10 years, and I've been fighting with the Putin regime for another 10 years. And what I've seen happen over and over and over again in situations where the compromat has come out is in them going after their enemies. So we saw, for example, the general prosecutor of Russia, who was investigating Yeltsin, they organized for him to be filmed in an apartment with two female prostitutes, and which then ended his career.
Mr. Browder's lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was imprisoned after exposing official corruption in Russia. He died in custody. The case convinced many in Washington that President Putin should never be trusted. Last week, Senator John McCain spoke at the Armed Services Committee. He saw the memo weeks back and was so concerned he gave it to the FBI.
Has the FBI investigated these reported relationships?
Yesterday, another senator quizzed the FBI chief about it, but he refused to disclose whether they were investigating.
You're fired.
9 days before he becomes president, Mr. Trump just hopes it will all go away, so he can get on with improving relations with President Putin.
Well, Trump spoke in Trump Towers. The markets went up and down like one of his golden elevators. And not just Wall Street. The dollar lost 1% in value. The Mexican peso was pummeled before it was revived. Big Pharma was hammered while car stocks shot up. And the FTSE, a record high. The word roller coaster comes to mind. Our business correspondent Helia Ebrahimi joins you now. Helia, you feeling dizzy?
Well, look, it's been mayhem. It's not all Trump's work, but mostly it is. The day started here in Britain, where the Bank of England Governor Mark Carney told MPs, well, the bank has to monitor Mr. Trump's Twitter account because, and I quote, what he says on Twitter is felt by markets. Well, it turned out the governor's words were deeply prophetic because before he stood up in this press conference, the Dow Jones was within touching distance of its historic 20,000 mark. The dollar was at a one-week high. The pound was having its worst day since October's flash crash. And then all of a sudden, a massive reverse, not just for the pound, not just for US stock markets, but for the peso as well. Massive, massive day in markets.
Helia, thanks very much. Ah, I'm sorry. We have another question for you. OK, so...
I have
what
answers.
happens? No, I'm going to have a question. So what happens now? Can we expect this to continue?
I think that the market is finding it really difficult to understand what are the policies behind the president-elect. So literally everything he is saying is causing huge momentum swings. But what you saw today was really, really disturbing for market participants. We're talking about billions of pounds and dollars being lost and won.
It's the end of predictability. Helia, thank you very much.
Well, joining us now is journalist and author Anne Applebaum, and in the studio, Jan Halper-Hayes from Republican Overseas, which represents the Republican Party in the United Kingdom. Anne Applebaum, would you agree that perhaps he had a point in getting riled about what he described as fake news?
I mean, it's pretty ironic hearing Trump criticize fake news, since fake news and conspiracy theories are how he first drew attention to himself and how he entered politics. But I would agree not so much with Mr. Trump, but with many of my colleagues who feel that it was not a good idea to release this piece of sort of undocumented material. It wasn't even intelligence material. It came from somebody who used to work for British intelligence. And to release it in the raw without verifying it or without finding out, establishing how much of it was true. There's plenty of stuff that we do know about Trump and his relationship to Russia. There's plenty of stuff that has been verified. And there's going to be plenty more stuff. There's going to be a lot of work for journalists to do over the next year and even the next weeks in understanding Trump's relationship to his company, which is still very complicated, in understanding his relationship to his business interests all over the world, in understanding his relationship to other world leaders and other political parties. All of that is going to take a lot of time and investigation. And I think a kind of red herring report that hasn't been verified and probably can't be wasn't actually all that useful at this stage. Let's look for the real Trump-Russia links, which we already know and we can already see.
Well, Jan Halper-Hayes, the other thing about the news conference was the spectacle, which was decidedly non-presidential.
Well, you know, did you expect it to be presidential?
Well, I mean, he is going to be president,
He
so one
is
would have
going
thought
to be
one might be
president.
slightly restrained and sort of get on with the job and have a little dignity about it.
Oh, well, the thing was that the press conference was not a presidential press conference. It was supposed to be, would he divest from his companies? Was he going to have a conflict of interest, which actually the president and the vice president are excused from that. So it really was a non-issue. But how was he going to deal with things? And as typical that happens with Trump, there's always something else that comes in and sucks up the oxygen. But I absolutely think that this has been manufactured. The timing of it is absolutely ridiculous. The fact is that many people in the press have had it since August, September. They cannot verify things. They're in analyzing what the documents actually look like. They don't match up with authentic documents. It's too many things. We have tapes. It's sleaze, it's sex, it's salacious, it's blackmail. You know, there's no moderation in the things. It's like everything dumped into one. And I'm just highly suspicious of it because also he has criticized the intelligence community the past couple of weeks, and it could be a little bit of a, let me get back at you.
So, but as a Republican, you have a sense of pride in the way he conducted himself today, presumably.
Yeah, well, pride in how he conducted himself. I have pride in that he made a decision. One of the biggest issues was, would he be unconstitutional? Would he be at risk if his hotels accepted money from foreign countries?
Okay, well, let me pause you there, because Anne Applebaum, that's a very important point. I mean, do you think he's done enough, in fact, to separate himself from his business in leaving it in the hands of his son and daughter?
No, I think we're actually just at the beginning of this conversation and just at the beginning of understanding what exactly he can do that's constitutional and what isn't. I don't think anybody believes that giving your business over to your children to run, particularly when your children are also going to be directly involved in your administration, is any kind of wall or any kind of separation that means anything. Nobody would, in no other circumstance would anybody accept it as genuine. And so, no, I think we are... the legal arguments are just starting, the investigations are just beginning, trying to understand how he's related to his companies, and is going to be a big task for the next few weeks and obviously the next 4 years. And I really do hope people are going to focus on and concentrate on that, because that is potentially really the most shocking thing about Trump, is that he is somebody who, and this is an interesting Russian connection, he's somebody who seeks to become like an oligarch as we know them in other countries, somebody who wields both political and business power at the same time. And we've never had that in American politics before, and I'm not sure we know how to deal with it.
Well,
so that's a very, very important thing to watch.
Can I press you on the spectacle? I mean, 9 days out, the President of the United States to come? The spectacle.
Look, I mean, that he was elected for spectacle. I mean, he came to public prominence as an entertainer and as a very vulgar entertainer. I'm not going to be very surprised if he continues to be a vulgar entertainer. That's what he does. What I'm hoping that the press and the public will begin to do is to hold him to his promises, to nail down his lies, and to establish what exactly is his relationship to his business interests and to his business partners around the world.
Vulgar entertainer? I mean, is that okay with you?
No, but I'd like to go back. I don't know if she listened to what the lawyer said. The bottom line is that it's not even subjected. There is no law, no mandate that prevents him from operating his business and running the country. He chose not to. He showed all those papers. He's divested himself of it. And in fact, he's going to give the profits that come from foreign companies and foreign countries that go into his hotel to the Treasury. But there's one thing that they didn't go over that I think is really key, is that no government official can benefit or share on the lease of the old post office where his hotel is in Washington, D.C. And I am just wondering if they have even dealt with that one.
Well, let's leave that one cooking, but thank you very much, Jan Harper-Hayes. And Anne Applebaum, thank you very much for joining us. Matt.
Thanks, John. Still to come tonight, President Obama delivers an emotional farewell in his hometown of Chicago, urging Americans to defend their democracy as he steps down from office.
If you're disappointed by your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself.